All righty. So it looks like everyone's entered. So first and foremost, thank you. Some great tunes by P Money. As I alluded to, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's amazing to see what people are joining from here. And again, as we've alluded before, your health is our top priority. And as I've said many, many, many times, as I've spoken to almost everyone, I know that community is more important now than ever before. As we're working from home, I think a lot of us are longing for those connections. So again, I have my dream job of being able to do that. For those I haven't met, my name is Greg Geibel, and I'm working incredibly hard to build a community here. We're focusing on, growing those friendships through meetup.com and through Slack, which we'll get into in a bit. And again, many of you have heard this story, but for those who haven't, started off by building in San Francisco, had a little bit of success. So we started growing that community to New York, and then it's amazing to start thinking about how we're doing this internationally, right? And as these events end, the conversation doesn't, right? So it's Slack, and now that's blowing up, and I'm calling P Money at ODark 30, like, hey, guess what? As that continues to grow. So ultimately, we're able to help more people, as we grow. And as we continue to help others, I want to make sure I call out the idea of Startup Cares. Startup Cares ends up matching people and opportunities just with the hopes that we're able to give back to a few more. So if we go to the next slide, although the venue's changed a little bit, you might be calling in from a swimming pool here. You might be logged in from your comfy couch or at a favorite coffee shop. But we're focused on learning, friendships, and life's hard enough. So let's have a little bit of fun. And through technology, we're able to do these things. Go to the next slide. I often chuckle about this slide because, many folks are, well, let me, bold statement, but I myself tried a yoga class on Zoom. That was an adventure, and we'll save it for another time. But if you aren't familiar with Zoom, recommend the videos being on. We'd like to make this as engaging as possible. Feel free to send some Q&A, as the conversation's going. We've got three amazing speakers, and, it's very rare that you have the opportunity to interact with them on the fly. If we go to the next slide, again, a little bit about our history. The reason why I call this slide out, or it brings me so much joy, is you see all of these, logos. And as I think about where we're going, I probably need to update this slide with smiling faces, because those people are ultimately building the community. So, we had a little bit of success in San Francisco, so we started to grow the community. If we go to the next slide, again, we then started to take the show on the road, to New York. And again, it's the logos here, and I finally got caught. Somebody on the marketing team, took out my fantastic logo that said your name here, or your logo here. I think it was in red, and I think it was yellow, and it may have been the way that it led to my friendship with Lindsay, because she after a presentation, she was just like, hey, this is dope, let's get involved. And a few phone calls later, terrible joke, we're here. So if we just go to if we could answer our question there. Okay, answer it next. Oh, I don't know. So, okay, everybody's answered the question though. Okay, guys. So, look at that, dude. That's amazing. I'll have to write that up in my. Anyway, sorry. We're live. So, okay. So the community is doing great. The stats amazing. Again, probably oversharing, but it looks like 80-ish people are returning. So that's dope. New to Zendesk, right? Started as a startup. That's why we are so passionate about our startups ourselves. And I love working on this team. 3 founders, trying to build the next generation of service first CRM. Now we've got over 145,000 customers, including Lessonly, Search Inside Yourself, FabFitFun. And with that, I'm out. As we go to the next slide, I'd like to hand it over to Liz and buckle up. This is going to be an amazing session filled with learning.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Craig. Very excited to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Liz. I have been working at startups in different stages, from 4 people in single office to hundreds of people at a hyper-growth startup with very specific focus on customer support and customer experience. And leading teams, working with teams in the same office as well as remotely, but never to that extreme circumstances as now. So cannot wait to ask all of the questions that are bugging me from Lindsay and Max, and talk a little bit about leadership, remote training, communication. So Lindsay and Max, maybe you can start with just a few words about yourself, and then we can dive right in.
Awesome. You want to kick it off, Lindsay?
Sure. Thanks, Max. So fun to be here with you guys, Lisa and Max and Greg and Tara and everybody supporting on the Zendesk side. I'm Lindsay. I'm the Director of Partnerships as well as our certified teacher community at the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, or SILY. Go for it. Totally fine. So we do mindfulness-based emotional intelligence trainings. And interestingly enough, I used to live and work in San Francisco, which is where SILY is based, and had to move down to San Diego about 6 years ago now. It's been a lot longer than I thought. So I've been working remotely now with a team that's largely been in an office for about 6 years, and had some real interesting learnings kind of prior to the pandemic, and now have had a chance to then support the team in implementing some of those across the board. And then of course, as our team, which is small, we are, I would say, still considered a startup, even though we're a nonprofit. We're 18 people, and similar kind of things to what everyone, I think, especially in a smaller, fast-moving organization, is experiencing in this remote environment. So excited to talk about that and some of the things that the mindfulness practice and culture has to inform around working remotely as well. So delighted to be here with Max. So thank you.
Amen to that. I'm glad to be here too. Thanks everybody for making time. If we've not met, my name's Max Yoder. I am pumped to learn more about mindfulness myself, because I can't imagine a more important time to be practicing something like that. I run a company called Lessonly out of Indianapolis, Indiana. We have a couple hundred people on the team, 1,000 customers, and we focus on training software. Largely, we sell that training software to customer service teams, and our job is to help people do better work so they can live better lives. And we help them do better work with their training software, particularly by spelling out what it looks like to do a job well. We find that companies can set people up in kind of a sink or swim situation where they are like, hey, figure it out. And the people who do figure it out can keep on. The people who don't figure it out have to go. We think a lot more people would figure it out if we don't go sink or swim, but we kind of spell things out more clearly about what it looks like to do a job well. So that's what we do with our training software. And we enjoy doing it. And we have, a bigger mission around doing better work. It's really about bringing compassion, clarity, and camaraderie to more teams. We think these are elements of teams that foster connection and that help us make more progress together. And I'll be sharing some of that today, and really looking forward to talking with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I couldn't imagine better people to talk to about leadership. And I think to get us started, that is probably the best place, with your experience and with what you have seen, how would you say leadership in remote environment is different than it is in this more traditional, office environment and work environment, especially in cases right now where a lot of people are thrown into remote work without necessarily having signed up for it. How about Lindsay? Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. It's such a different environment. When I went remote, I was not the manager of a team, but over time became manager of a larger and larger team. And so noticing the differences of what that looked like was really profound for me. And I think one of the biggest things is that it is so natural to for remote work to create a sense of isolation and a sense of this, like, oh, I don't know what that other person is doing. There's a little bit of maybe a potential for a breeding of distrust that can happen. Anyone who's had two offices where there's been interaction between two remote offices has experienced this. And so as a leader, making sure that there is this communication about things that are going on, stuff that you would know just by like being in the air if you were in an office, right? Like, what am I working on? Initially, when I moved, I would encounter situations where there was a project going on that I needed to know about, but the important people didn't know that I needed to know about it. And so we were doing double work while I was working remotely. And so having a leader that is demonstrating a sense of, first of all, maybe over communicating or setting aside a little extra time to do updates. And this is something that as a remote team we've done over the last 6 months, which is having just a super quick round robin in our staff meetings of any updates that want to be shared. That seems so, logical and clear, but it's something that as a leader to demonstrate that and show the kinds of updates that are shared, it's really, really helpful. As well as if there are personal things that need to be shared. And even in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw that with Cuomo, right? Sharing some of the personal sides of his story that could connect to then his constituents. That kind of leadership has been so powerful. So both for my teams and from our CEO, we're able to share a little bit about the personal nature of what's going on so that people understand that everybody's going through, especially now, everybody's going through their own really difficult challenges with the pandemic, and having that permission for, as Max was mentioning, compassion feels really important right now.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think I'm gonna say some similar stuff, maybe in slightly different ways, because I'm in complete agreement. It has been a lot harder to invigorate our sense of camaraderie as a remote team, and I don't think we really know how to do this well yet. The things that are working well for us right now are the times when we just pick up the phone and unstructured check in with teammates. As Lindsay mentioned, myself and other folks who are on the executive team being clear that we don't have this all figured out, that this is also stressful for us, that it's scary for us, and making it clear that we can't be working all the time, because that's what we found a lot of people are doing when we made this switch, is they just kind of, the boundaries went away. We used to have this shift from walls of work to the walls of home, and now we don't. And I think a lot of people are pouring themselves into their work. So we had to be incredibly clear and almost just super persistent around the message of, you have to take time off. Just like you would have taken time off in normal times, you need to take time off now. There's nowhere to go in some cases, or there are fewer places to go. That doesn't mean we can't be unplugging. So I think it's a really important time to be vulnerable. I think it's a really important time to force those kind of things that would have happened naturally in the office by picking up the phone and calling somebody and saying, hey, how are you doing? Person to person, as opposed to talking about work all the time. And we're finding more and more of our folks are getting comfortable, meeting in parks and sitting down where they can, just to see one another. So right now it just takes extra effort, but people are really hungry for that extra sense of just being in the same spot. I do a lot of walks down streets with people now, so that we can kind of be apart from one another talking. I know not everybody has that luxury, but we're just trying to make this work as best we can. I don't know if that's exactly what you were looking for in an answer, but that's what I got right now.
No, I think that's amazing, and all very, very good points. I love the idea of vulnerability and showing that you don't always have to be smiling, and this is also totally fine. And it can be hard, and it's hard for everybody, I guess. It just takes the pressure off. How about supporting young leaders? So we have managers, but we also have managers of managers. Is there anything in specific that you would do or you would encourage when working with your young managers who are doing it for the first time, and trying to support their team who is managing a team?
Yeah, I'll kick this one off. I think a big part of my job is, and I think a big part of all of our jobs, if we want to be leading or managing, is to help people see kind of barriers that they are creating in their lives. Roadblocks, we all put up our own roadblocks, right? We all have our own biases. We all have our own cognitive distortions, and they make our lives harder. So when we communicate with other people, we can see those things more clearly. And a big part of my job right now is to debunk any notion that perfectionism or being perfect is a goal. So that's a thing that I'm talking about a lot with the team. Perfectionism, I think, is a plague of modern culture. People put it on their resumes like, hey, I'm a perfectionist, like that's a good thing. And my opinion is nothing can be more self-limiting or corrosive to your life than trying to be some perfect person. Because perfection forces us to hide the parts of ourselves that don't map to a perfect thing, right? It forces us to reject that we're human. I've never met a human that is perfect, yet people strive to be something that I just don't even think is possible. So what's the alternative? Wholeness is the alternative. WHOLENESS, wholeness. And wholeness is being able to acknowledge that you have above average qualities, average qualities, below average qualities. You have strengths, you have weaknesses. Effectively, wholeness is saying, I'm a human. Therefore, I will do human things. I will forget stuff. I will interrupt, and I can apologize when I do it. I will be a full person, and I won't be ashamed of being a full person. And I think in a time like right now, it couldn't be more important for us not to be ashamed of being humans, because we're going to have, in the very same moment, feelings of, I'm really grateful for stuff that's happening right now, and gosh, this is really hard and tough, all at the same time. These kind of, these feelings where there's more than one feeling, right? Where I'm both relieved and I'm stressed at the very same moment. And a perfectionist is not allowed to do that, right? A perfectionist isn't allowed to be stressed or be behind. But we're not perfectionists. We're whole people. So I think mindset is a big part of how we adjust to this world. And I think if we don't make that adjustment, it's going to be pretty clear that perfectionism isn't working for people anymore. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I love this thought. I think it ties really nicely back to what Lindsay was saying before, being vulnerable, showing your leaders that it's okay not to be perfect, to do mistakes, and then admit them and move on. And ideally, lead by example.
Amen.
Yeah, I hear. The other thing that comes up for me in thinking about that is the modeling of self-awareness. So I feel like, Max, from what I know about you, you're doing that so well. You're aware of your own high qualities, average qualities that you wish you were better at, and you can model what that's like for your mid-level management, let's say, and so that they can see what it's like in practice, be able to practice their own self-awareness, have that permission, and then model that for their own teams in a way that supports the wholeness of the whole org, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think a lot of times, just real quickly, I think a lot of times modeling is seen as like, oh gosh, I have to do it perfect. Like if I'm going to be a model, I got to do it perfect. And that's trouble, right? Because we can't do that. So what modeling actually is, in my opinion, is do the things that you want to see other people do, right? Live up to your speech, live up to your values. And when you don't, which naturally you won't, because you're a human, just like naturally I won't because I'm a human, just say it. Say, hey, I didn't live up to it that time. Say I'm sorry, and you're modeling again. You're either hitting the nail on the head by doing the things you want people to do, or you're missing the mark and then you're speaking to it and saying, you know, that was a human moment for me. And I think you're modeling there. So I think the job is to model, but modeling doesn't mean doing it perfectly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think the hardest step sometimes is the very first step. So, you know, in my organizations or my experience, the times when our leaders have been vulnerable have, you know, actually been the times when they get the most support, and people really kind of, you know, realize and relate and are very proud of their managers. But to do that very first step, almost like stepping into the unknown, without knowing what the response is going to be, is probably really difficult. So do you have, you know, to wrap up this topic, do you have any, you know, tactical advice for all of the leaders on how to navigate this and how to be an example, how to be a leader, or how to take that first step?
I might just say one thing, which is a little bit to the side of advice, but I think there's a real myth that taking, let's say, the extra time to do some of these things is going to create a slowdown, right? And so as a leader or as a manager, when you are considering what it is like to spend a little bit of time on the personal, right? Or actually have, we're actually doing at Silly dedicated water cooler conversation, where it's like totally unstructured. Anybody can come. Let's just talk about whatever. And that's right. That's time on your calendar. It looks like a burden. But what I found is that by having some of that, it really greases the wheels of the things that I have to get done. Because it's like, then when I'm having my human moment, people are going to support me. If I need something from a team member, there's no hesitation. That just little bits of building this personal relationship does feed into that sense of camaraderie. And then it's easier for someone to say, oh, you know, I see that right now I have some space and that person's really slammed. We can work together and grease these wheels and be more productive as a team, more effective as a team. So I just want to dispel that myth a little bit, because it's so easy to look at something on your calendar and be like, oh God, this is unsustainable. But I think the opposite is more unsustainable.
I like that you went to a myth, because I'd like to go to a myth on this last one too, which is leaders know the answer is a myth. Leaders, KNOW, know the answer is an absolute myth. And we should remember that leaders learn the answer. And that's a big difference between knowing the answer and learning the answer. If I'm allowed to learn the answer, which is the way any leader does anything, you know, this world is way too complicated to go around knowing how to do anything that comes your way. But we can learn how to do what comes our way. So how do we apply that idea of leaders learn the answer and kind of still have people trust us? A lot of times when I talk about vulnerability, people think that means they're completely uncertain. And I don't think that's what vulnerability is. I think it's recognizing the places where you are uncertain, but you can still have certainty at the very same time. So I can look at somebody and go, I'm sure we can figure it out, which is me bringing certainty into the equation. I'm just not sure how yet. You know, and so there we go. I'm uncertain. I'm certain. I'm sure we can figure it out. I'm certain about that. I'm just not sure how. And there's my uncertainty. It's a balance of the two, right? And in the middle is where I'm sitting right now, which is I bet we can figure it out, but I'm just not sure how yet. And that's how I think every leader can operate. And then it invites their team in to suggest ideas and to be a part of the solution, which is what people want to do, right? They want to co-create. They just don't want to be told what to do. So leaders learn the answer, not by being 100% uncertain, but by balancing some level of certainty with uncertainty.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a beautiful thought to end this discussion with. You know, we're certain that we can learn to know what the answers are, and we don't have to know what the answer is. And you know, it I think creates that feeling for the rest of the team that they are part of the solution in any scenario, which is really nice. And then on the chat here, we also had Andrew mentioning, you know, their company began semi-weekly virtual happy hours where they play checkbox games. That's awesome. Love it. You know, all types of, I guess, like encouragement to create that water cooler conversation or casual conversation is awesome. Yeah, keep the questions coming. If you have anything that you want to ask Lindsay or Max, just put it on chat, and we can take it from here. But moving on, you know, we've got Max here, and I would love to know more about training in this remote world. You know, you're seeing those trends at the higher level. So are there any, you know, any trends that you've seen happening in your world, and what are companies doing now in terms of remote training?
Yeah, the trend that we're seeing that is most pronounced is the new world of training has practice in it, whereas the old world of training had a lot of reading in it. And you probably experienced this if you've read a book where you've taken in a lot of knowledge, but then it hasn't influenced your behavior. That just reading something doesn't change behavior, right? We have to take what we've read and apply it, and we do that through practice. So what we're seeing a lot of companies do as they're teaching people is not just rely on the reading part, which is a part of it, right? I have to kind of understand what I'm about to practice before I go practice it, but I need to actually work the muscles. And they're doing this with role playing, you know, two individuals coming together and doing role playing together. When we do role play, we have to do the play part because that's what makes role play fun. And that's what makes practicing possible is the play part. There's a gentleman named Carl Groos who in 1901 wrote a book about play, humans in play. And the big idea behind it was play is the instinct to practice other instincts. So if we can cultivate a sense for play, we will practice new things because that's what play is. It's picking something up, unstructured, and learning how to do it. And I think the older we get as adults, we become really serious, and play becomes something that we stop doing because, you know, we're serious people now. But if we become serious people, we stop playing, and therefore we stop practicing. So in order to cultivate a culture of practice at your work, we have to make it playful. And that's going to be really uncomfortable for a lot of folks who haven't flexed their playful muscles for a while. But those people probably also aren't practicing very much right now because it's intimidating as heck to practice as a perfectionist. It's very fun to practice if you take on the mind of a child, which is, I'm going to try this new thing out. I'm not expected to know how to do something well that I've never done before, but I'm going to give it a go. And the more times I work the muscle, the better I'll get at it. And if we think about practicing everything that way, oh, what a beautiful thing. The world's our oyster, right? We can be curious about anything. We can approach it. We can try it. And just like a kid playing with something, we just learn as we go. And we don't look around going, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Have you ever seen a kid do that? Look around and be like, am I doing? They don't do that. You know, they're not like, am I doing this right? They're just playing. And I think us cultivating a sense for play is huge. Not going to be possible in every team, right? Certain cultures are just not going to push that forward. But I think our cultures need to push that forward if we want people to keep practicing, because practice is how we actually build behavior. It's not by reading something. So that's my big takeaway right now is people are sensing that it doesn't work by reading, and it never did. And they're bringing more practice opportunities through role play, through simulations, and that's helping people build actual muscles and know what to do before they're talking to the customer, which the customer appreciates, right? When somebody has practiced something before, you know, they don't want to be practiced on if you're a customer.
Yeah, 100%. I love this idea. Anything to add from your side, Lindsay, in terms of like what are the trends that you've seen or noticed?
I was actually going to comment on one thing that Max mentioned, which is a little less on the trend, but more on the what that facilitates, right? What this play, this attitude of like trying things out. You know, there was the Aristotle study that came out of Google, quest to find the perfect team, and finding that the most effective teams, the top predictor of effective team was psychological safety. And so I love this application of play into how do we support people feeling safe to experiment, not know the answer, say stuff that they may or may not, you know to be true, or check stuff out, or that's how innovation happens, right? That's how change that's actually relevant to what's going on in the world, in the VUCA world, happens. And so I love that invitation to building psychological safety. And I think there's a sense of, now, if I could identify any trends from from my worldview, is this sense of just we're adapting so rapidly. You have to be ready to adapt within a really, really short time. And the only way to really do that is to keep throwing spaghetti, keep doing things differently. Yeah, just love that invitation.
Yeah, that's really nice. And it actually ties back to what we were just talking about, leadership. And actually, there was a question from Max, like to Max, about this, like the same notion. Leaders don't know, they learn. Do you think there is a way to hire as well? Like, is someone's ability and eagerness to learn in a way to figure out who a leader might be? Which I think ties really nicely into both of those things that we were just talking about, training and encouraging that eagerness and learning and testing, not just in training, but being a leader.
Amen. Yeah, I think I'm a huge fan of curiosity and kind of up and coming leaders. I think it's a great sign in an up and coming leader if they're highly curious, if they're voraciously learning new things, trying new things, and not taking themselves so seriously that they can't make mistakes, because they're screwed, right? If that's their mentality of, hey, I have to nail it or I'm terrible, right? If it's that kind of binary, we're not going to grow at all. So I like looking for leaders who are highly curious, who find joy in things that other people don't find joy in, who can find appreciation in things, because the job of a leader is sometimes a slog. But through that slog, if we can kind of pull out the nuggets of, hey, this is why that was meaningful or valuable, we can keep going. So I think the mindset of somebody who wants to be in a leadership position is huge. I don't know how to scan for it. I don't have any aptitude for scanning for that. But I do know that if I find somebody who's highly curious, I bet they have a really high ceiling. And if I find somebody who's kind of incurious about the world, that's going to be tough.
Yeah, 100%. Coming back to training and being remote, are there any things in specific that you would tell or you would advise people to be aware of when they're training remotely versus when they're training in a face-to-face environment?
Yeah, it's more important than ever to preface your training with why it's important to the person who's taking the training. I think a lot of times companies will, we've seen it many times. We have 1,000 customers. They build a lot of lessons. I couldn't tell you the number, but there's a lot of lessons out there. And the number one thing we remind people to do right at the start is tell the learner why this was made for them. Not why it's helpful to the company, not why it's helpful to the team. Those things can be a part of it, right? Hey, we want you to take this lesson to learn this thing, and then we want you to practice after. Not only because it's helpful for the company, but also because it's going to help you do this. It's going to help you get this thing out of the way, or it's going to help you accelerate this part of your day, or it's just going to give you more time back in your day. So what is in it for me to kick off lessons that way? It's big, and it can be easy to forget that and just think, hey, we'll just tell them why it's good for the company, and then they'll just be thrilled about it. Please connect that dot. And I think sometimes the dot isn't connected because the assumption is it's clear, but assuming, is a tough thing, is not the way to go in training. It's not the way to go in life. Let's spell it out, and as people take the lessons and take the practice scenarios, when you get feedback from them, we always encourage you to recycle that to the front of a lesson, so that the next person going through it can read other people who look like them, who have gone through this lesson, who, when I say look like them, they're in the same job as them, right? Same role. And they see that it's been helpful for people who are in the same role as them. Well, then they're going to believe it's going to be helpful for them too. So recycling that stuff back in, kicking it off at the beginning, and don't put yourself in the shoes of the person taking the lesson. If you're like, I never want to take this lesson, I bet they don't either. We have to have that empathy of, and it can be lost because there's a disconnect between sometimes the people building the lessons and the people who are taking them. So as much as we can bring in the people who are supposed to be taking the lessons early in the process and sanity checking it with them, the better. It's the last thing I'll say in this is share before you're ready. Find 5 people on the front lines who are going to be taking your training. And while you're building the training, sanity check it with them over and over again. What do you like about this? What do you not like about this? What am I missing? And keep asking those questions. And I bet your lesson gets better. I bet it gets a lot better. But if you stay in a vacuum and then you deliver it later, again, good luck. I don't recommend that route.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really important, especially now, because from our experience, we have done a lot of retraining because in the remote world, the processes that we need to do and the work and how we do it has changed. And we, totally made this mistake in just training everybody and then hoping that they would do it, and realize that this is not how change management works. Exactly as you said, first, why are we doing this? Does everybody understand what's the need before jumping into this is what you should do?
You're not the first. We constantly have to make that mistake, and ideally we learn from it.
One of the things that I love about what you shared, Max, is this sense of the feedback loop, because just in my experience in training, everybody that's ever worked for me at Silly has been trained remotely. and in this giving a lesson or, a learning, going away, having them do it on their own, and then coming back and checking in, not only do they feel empowered and they see how it's useful and all of that, but then they usually do something that I didn't think of. And they're like, oh, what about this? And I'm like, oh, that's genius. So yes, we should do it that way from now on. So there's that loop, which is so helpful.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. There's another really good question from Brandon, which I think applies to both, the leadership as well as the remote training. Do you see any new normals becoming standard in post-pandemic?
Lindsay, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, thanks. I crystal ball. I think there are a lot of things that we can't know for sure, but one of the things that we're seeing, we have been training people in person for years. In fact, that was a point right before the pandemic hit that we had come to this. Okay, what is our best in the world at? And it was in-person live trainings, and then boom, coronavirus and the fallout. And so now we've had this shifting to online and doing all of our programs online. And what's been fascinating about that, we've kind of moved slow, ideally to move fast, which is it took us 3 or 4 months to really have an online program released. But now we're seeing people saying, wow, I can be in an online session with you guys for 4 hours and not come away with Zoom fatigue. And so there's a way of relating in Zoom or whatever platform you're using that I think the learnings from that are never going to go away. We're gonna learn through this process how to connect to each other in an online format in a way that at least minimizes, I'm not going to say Zoom fatigue is going to go away completely, but that at least minimizes Zoom fatigue, where we are able to incorporate, again, that personal, I am literally taking this call from my daughter's bedroom, my 2-year-old's bedroom. Like, we have to bring in the human part of ourselves. There's no choice. We're forced in some ways. And I think there's a value in that will become a little bit more of a new normal, hopefully following the pandemic.
Yeah, I like where you went on that. We are seeing that we can do things remotely that maybe we didn't know were possible before. And I think there's some really cool equity stuff that we can get out of this, which is, healthcare is having to adapt to this, where if I can have more FaceTime with my doctor and not having to get in a car, not everybody has cars, right? And everybody lives close to the hospital that they want to get the care from. And if the hospital isn't set up in a way to be able to work in a kind of a remote world, then I have to get in my car and drive. And what if I don't have a car? What if I don't have access? So we can increase access to doctors. We can increase access to, even the legal system, which right now is highly onerous for a lot of folks. Why can't we, pay our tickets or kind of show up for court through a Zoom meeting? And that could increase some equity for folks who do not find it very easy to get into the courtroom. So I'm just throwing out some random ideas here of the world is being forced to adapt, and ideally that'll help more people connect to more people who they weren't, there's just a lot of systems that were not ready for this. And in 5 days, they had to be ready for it. And I think it might've taken them 15 years otherwise, and so that punch in the face that the world got forced these systems to fast forward in a way that I hope will persist, with a lot of positives.
Yeah, it's like they say, 10 years of change happened in just a few months. So
yes,
it's the fact that it's accelerating. It's not always just changing, but it's just accelerating where we were moving before. Amazing. I think that's a great kind of, intro to the next topic. about communication overall, and learning how and when to communicate or over communicate. I mean, the first question in my head is like, is there such a thing as over communication, especially in the remote workplace? What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say somebody might call it over communicating, but if they're mocking me, then I'm probably getting the message across. I am more than happy to say the same things again and again, and ideally with different anecdotes, right? Different stories around the same idea. So I talk about sharing before I'm ready a lot, which was the thing I talked about with the lessons, where, you know, we create the lesson and share before we're ready with the front line and say, you know, what do you like? What do you not like? What am I missing? I'm talking about sharing before I'm ready with the team all the time, because their natural instinct, just like my natural instinct is, or our cultural instinct is, to be perfectionists and not share before we're ready. So I got to talk about that all the time. Now, have I over communicated it? Yes, probably. Do people say, okay, I'm sharing before I'm ready here, and then kind of everybody laughs? Yes, they do. But they're doing it. You know, so I think, you know, getting a focus on what are the few things that I as a manager need you to be doing in order for us to be successful. Distilling down to, you know, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, whatever it is. It can't be 50, right? But what are the 5 kind of fundamentals that if I repeat them over and over again, and right now it's probably, you know, we need to make time for life is something that needs to be overly communicated, of making time for life, getting off the computer, going, taking a walk, interweaving our work days into our kind of non-work days in ways that we didn't used to be able to do before, right? I'm totally comfortable with my teammates taking a nap for 30 minutes in the middle of the day. I don't, you know, they can take a nap for an hour. Like, that could be really good for them. I do it, you know, so making time for life is a thing that I will communicate over and over again. And I guess I'm going to distill this down to saying, figure out what you need people to do and the stuff that moves the needle the most, and then repeat the hell out of that. And it's okay if you said it yesterday. Find new stories, find new examples of people doing it, because that's our job, is to distill things down to the fundamentals and then say them over and over again, and then live them over and over again, and then praise people who do them over and over again.
I love that. Thank you, Max. And I what I really appreciated about that was you said you might communicate something over and over again with different anecdotes.
Yeah.
There's something about that really I like a lot, because one of the things that we do is, I think we probably, if anybody looked into our organization, they would probably say, wow, you guys maybe over communicate. And generally speaking, but I think there are different ways of communicating some of the same stuff that's really helpful. So like, again, in a staff meeting, we'll have some time for people to just say, hey, what am I working on? Some announcements, things that they think other people need to know. A different thing that we do is that we have regular appreciation rounds, where in the beginning of a meeting, it's a cross-functional meeting. We take 3 minutes, and there's literally a timer, just popcorn style, to appreciate someone who did something. And so that's a way, one, of getting all the feel goods, and 2, then you also know the things that are going on, right? Because someone's being appreciated for something that they're doing, some project that they're on or whatever. So it's a beautiful way to kind of see both of those things. We also have one of the practices in our program is called looping, and it's very simple. Just, what I heard you say is blah, 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 blah. And we try to make it a practice to do that, especially when we're learning something new from a team member. And so, right, that feels like over communication, but it is so instructive to see when the understanding that you had did not match what they were getting at, and that happens. So like, I think all of these things are useful methods of over communication that are really helpful. And when you're thinking about over communicating, right, you're not doing it just for its own sake. So I really liked what Max said about knowing what is your objective. Like, be intentional about the over communication. Don't just, you know, when I share about the fact that I'm in my daughter's bedroom, I do it so that then we're relatable. Any parent out there, we can connect, or then you understand that, like, I have a whole world in my life that's going on besides work. And I think there is an intentionality behind that. And so it's all, I think, in my mind, it's always about checking the intention. Is your intention to be supportive to others, to make sure that you feel comfortable, to make sure that the product, you know, there's some measurable thing around productivity? Or is it just, well, I'm just going to share because I feel like talking a lot? Like, I think we get to be really introspective around what is our intention as a colleague, as a leader, etc., and then use over communication as a way to support those things.
So many great ideas. I love this.
I never heard looping. That was awesome. Thank you. I mean, I've heard of the process, but I never heard it called looping. So I'm going to steal that because that's a great process. It does constantly reveal that people are on two different pages when we start looping. So highly recommend.
Yeah, that's super good. On the appreciation, again, like couldn't agree more. We actually started something similar. We do like virtual superstars. So everybody submits like who they want to give thanks to. And then on our kind of weekly team all hands, we always pick two and then we read it out and they get like a little, coffee voucher, but just saying, what are you, who are you appreciating, or what are you thankful for, and direct it to some specific person. And then I really love the idea that you both brought up looping, because that was actually one of the questions that I had, and one of the things that I feel is pretty difficult. Because when you're communicating in a normal kind of, face-to-face environment, you can see if people are interacting. You can, see them nodding. You can see them, maybe zoning out. But you have this feedback loop. What are other ways that you can encourage that, like acknowledgement, or ways that you can make sure that the message is getting across? And it's not, if somebody's on Zoom, videos off, you have no idea what they're doing, how much were they listening and so on. So any advice or any ideas for the folks here about this like acknowledgement, and looping is a great example of that.
Yeah. Clarifying questions in general are huge. Don't leave the room with a thought of, I think I understood, even if it's a Zoom room, leave the room saying, I want to make sure I understand this. And I think a lot of times we don't ask clarifying questions culturally because we don't want to look like we're interrogating the person, questioning the validity of whatever they're suggesting. We don't want to come off as not understanding, not really rapid fire smart. But I think the smartest people in the room are the people who keep everybody on the same page, not the ones who try to look real smart, right? Like, let's keep one another on the same page. And so to ask a clarifying question is to say, hey, I want to make sure I got this. Can I ask a couple clarifying questions? And I'm stating my intention there as I ask the clarifying questions. I want to make sure I understand. I think this is really interesting. It might be another way I say, hey, I think this is really interesting. I want to make sure I knock it out of the park. May I ask a few clarifying questions? And that's going to reveal a lot. The less I ask clarifying questions, the more I tend to walk away thinking I know what's happening and I'm guessing. But the more I ask clarifying questions, the more I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, I totally misunderstood what that person meant. And it's nice to know that in the moment. And it's really thoughtful, in my opinion, to take the time to go, I just want to make sure I understand. And I'm interested in this. Can I ask some questions? I know that I respect it and appreciate it. And I hope culturally we can develop a sense for respecting and appreciating it more. Because I mean, the statistics are in. The older we get, the fewer clarifying questions we ask. Just look at a kid, right? They're all day, bingo, bang, like clarifying questions all day. But then we get older and we're like, well, no, I get it. I totally got it. Yeah, I knew what you meant. Even though people naturally under-explain everything. Anyhow, that's all I got.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also want to say that there isn't a time limit on that. Like, I might go away from a meeting thinking like, okay, I got it. But then something just isn't sitting right. Like, I'm like, oh, there's something, I'm just not sure. And I actually have to take some time to really sit and think, okay, they said this and they said this, but this doesn't quite make sense to me. And then giving the opportunity to come back. Like,
yes.
And if you don't, and I think this is true of any situation, even charged situations where you're like, something doesn't feel right, or I'm literally angry in this meeting, I need to take some time and reflect, and can we come back to this at a different time? Like, knowing that we don't just have to get it right now, but that we can do it over time, I think is a really helpful assumption.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Amazing. There was a great question on chat from Patrick. How do you draw out clarifying questions from a quiet audience, for example, in a Zoom-based training? Any tips on that?
Yeah, I like to tell folks that I like to remind people how important it is. So the thing that I try to do with in any Zoom meeting when I'm facilitating a training is to let people know, hey, this is going to be a lot more fun if we communicate, and it's going to be pretty boring if we all kind of sit back and, you know. So I'm basically encouraging them to bring a certain posture to this, and letting them know I've been in a lot of these meetings before. The ones that are the most fun, that go by the fastest, that we take the most away, is when we communicate, is when we ask clarifying questions. So a question came through on, you know, how do we get our teammates to ask clarifying questions? And I think, and, you know, how do we encourage interaction in general? And I think it's about, first and foremost, making it clear why it's so important. And you know, the way I like to make it clear is there's this thing called the curse of knowledge. It's this thing that if I know something, I assume you know it too, which means I'm naturally going to under explain and leave out important details when I talk. That means that it's really important that you ask clarifying questions, because I am naturally going to under explain and leave out important details when I talk all the time. And so are you. So if we know that about one another, and we know it's a human bias, then it's our responsibility to ask clarifying questions. It's not just like nice to have. We are going to leave out information. We have to do it. So I think letting people know like the root of why it's so darn important, and not assuming they know, is one way to spur it. And then you yourself asking clarifying questions. That's celebrate when people do it, and do it yourself. You know, that's the two things you can control. What am I celebrating? And am I doing it myself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's one really practical piece that may or may not always be available, but I found that if the size of the group on Zoom is over even like 6 or 7 people, people tend to be a little less, like it's different in a group of 3 or 4 to throw out a question that might feel a little weird or whatever than it is in a larger group. And so one of the things when we're doing sharing something that's important, that's going to require a lot of cross collaboration, we'll do Zoom breakouts of like 3 people. Say, all right, just jump in. What questions do you have? What did you understand from that, et cetera? And then come back to the group. And having done that, then those questions can be surfaced much more easily. So depending on the format that works, that's been a really helpful way to surface things that just like shyer people may not have said in any case in the larger group.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great idea. I've actually never tried this, but we'll definitely take it away from here to try Zoom breakouts. The other thing that I sometimes do, and try and make sure that it comes off very friendly, I ask questions myself, and I pinpoint like specific people. You know, once I've done with, something that I really want to get across, I'm like, hey, like, Lindsay, what do you think of this? Like, do you agree with the idea? Or, do you think it will be challenging to do this or this? So just trying to, sometimes by just calling out people and asking questions from them, kind of like not about, okay, what did I just say? But, what do you think? Any other ideas? I feel like I've started doing it a lot more than I ever did in a real life environment. And the other thing that we've sometimes, I think unconsciously we're doing, about like 2 to 5 minutes in the beginning of the meeting, start with like a friendly banter and just talk to people so they would feel comfortable and would want to turn on their video and feel like, hey, it's like, I don't know, really bad day today or it's been really great or busy or whatever, so that we would get off not to a very official start, but in a like friendly like casual start, so that they would feel a little bit more engaged. Gosh, that was so much good information. Max, Lindsay, amazing. I loved, I'm just going to go through some of the notes that I made, which just to remind myself, Lindsay, what you said about moving slow to move fast so resonates, such a great idea. From you, Max, like learning what the answer is, not necessarily knowing what the answer is, like showing that vulnerability to your team to make sure that they would feel fine being vulnerable as well, and knowing that perfectionism is not the goal. We're all here to learn. We're all here to find out what to do, leading by example and trying to like create that symmetry where, you know, you do what you want your team to do, you know, sharing before you're ready, over communicating, and being very intentional about what you communicate, to make sure that the message will get to people, and then communicate it, you know, as long as you can, and they will laugh, but you would still go for it because at least you know that the message is coming across. And yeah, some kind of tactical things around appreciation circles, and breakout rooms. So thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. Learned a lot. And yeah, I think we're giving it back to you, Greg.
Outstanding. I can't thank you, Liz, Max, and Lindsay enough. Paige kind of just exploded with all these ideas and, wholeness, right? Acknowledge we all have strengths and weaknesses. Live up to your values, yet we all have human moments. Cultivate a sense of play, which ultimately leads to a bit of practice. And Max, I might add it, also some laughter, right? Leaders learn the answers, and then ultimately make time for life. And then one other thing that, you shared with me prior to this was just the idea of charity and grace. And with that, I think the three of you showed both charity, grace, and a willingness to help others, as you shared your knowledge. So I guess, for those who are within our Slack community already, my ask from you would maybe be to go to our Pro Tips channel and share with others. Maybe share a best practice or lesson learned so others can also grow, with that knowledge. And then from there, for those who aren't in our community, I'll be sending you a follow-up email asking if you'd like to join and if you'd like to get engaged. So with that, just a huge thank you again, and I'm incredibly excited to see the community growing. So thanks everyone.